As I'm sure most of you know, last month was our Missions Month. We focused on our missions, missionary outreach, and that is both home and abroad. And one of our concerns for our own denomination, which we voted to remain in a couple of years ago, was the titanic loss of churches. We started as a denomination with 8,000 churches, and there are now 5,000, 3,000 losses. That's an enormous loss. And one of the matters we prayed about and we're concerned about is the opportunity to hear the gospel in our churches, and a project called Overseed grew out of that vote. And I'm going to ask Jim Harrell if he'll come and bring us a little up to date on that ministry. In the fall of 2005, Byfield Parish formed a committee to recommend, should we stay or should we go in terms of the UCC. And one of the outcomes of that process was in the summer of 2008, we formed a nonprofit called Overseed. And it's an organization dedicated to recruiting, equipping, and supporting evangelical pastors to take pulpits in mainline churches. And you may be thinking that sounds like a crazy idea. I used to. I came to Byfield in 1999. My wife and I moved here for me to finish seminary. And I had already been approved to go into church planting with the Baptist General Conference. And the Lord directed us here. I did not know it was a mainline church. I don't know if I would have come, but I did, and I'm glad I did. And so I wanted to be on that committee because I wanted to interview Bill Boylan. I wanted to know why anybody would spend 30 years in a mainline church. 30 years at that time, we're now up to 40 plus. In my narrow view, and it was very narrow, that just seemed like a waste of time. And so as part of that team, I spent a day with Bill and Miriam listening to their story in great detail. And I came home that day and I said to my wife, I said, it really isn't about changing the UCC. I think Bill's talking about just planting churches in existing buildings in order to preach Christ again. And she went, well, maybe. And so the next week, as God would have it, I took the youth group down to Dorchester to the Boston Project. And I was sleeping on some hardwood floor in Boston. And I couldn't sleep, so I got up about 6 o'clock in the morning and trying to find coffee. And I went around the corner, and here was this huge UCC church in the middle of Dorchester begging for money to fix the roof. And God began to speak to my heart. And I stood on that corner for a long time, and God took Bill's story and all my church planting background and began to connect all the dots and began to morph it into a vision of replanting. And as I stood there, I said, God, I think you have just given me an idea on how to maybe do this. And I thought, well, that sounds kind of arrogant. But I said, you're going to have to do what you do, which is change hearts and open doors. But if this will work, I'm in. And, over the next couple of years, the vision came to fruition in Overseed. Now, mainline denominations such as the UCC actually have 80,000 churches still in the United States. Over 19 million members. It's 15% of the U.S. population. Unfortunately, many of these churches are declining because they have liberal pastors which are not preaching Christ. They love people, they love the church, but they're trying to do the work of God without the power of God and the wisdom of God, which is only found in the gospel. And what we believe the fundamental solution is to oversee these churches with the gospel again. But you got to do that from the pulpit. It is extremely hard to change a liberal church as a layperson. It's been done. It's just really, really hard. But if you put a pastor in the pulpit and he begins to preach Christ and Him crucified, if he's truly incarnational in terms of loving people and going at God's pace, tremendous revival can happen. And so towards that end, we're trying to recruit and equip and support evangelicals to go do that. Now, there's a God-ordained opportunity right now. The UCC and a lot of these other denominations, they cannot produce enough pastors. Nobody wants to go be a pastor. It's not really a lucrative job. It's not really prestigious. And as a result, only people called by God are willing to make the sacrifice. And so what happens is in the UCC right now, there's 600 open positions, and they have 200 applications. And they're not all that great. And so there's a window of opportunity here we're probably going to see in the next 20 years, 50% of pulpits change hands. And the question is, to what? And our hope is it will be to evangelicals. But the problem is, most evangelicals do not go to seminary thinking, I think I'll take a mainline pulpit. That sounds interesting. They don't even know it exists. And so part of what we're doing at Overseed is we're going to seminaries and we're presenting this vision that, you don't have to be a youth pastor. You don't have to be a pastor of a huge megachurch. You can actually replant in existing churches with the goal of actually reaching a community for Christ. And God's at work. We've been doing these lunch and learns at Gordon Conwell. The last one we did, we had 30 students come and hear our vision. The director of mentoring ministered said that's the largest attendance at any event like that she's ever seen. So God seems to be at work with this. The other problem you have is, for an evangelical to go to mainline church is like going to France. It is a different world. And so there's a certain missionary component. There has to be a preparation of understanding how do you do that. And so towards that end, we've developed a 3-year mentoring curriculum to go over the practicals of the pastorate from the point of view of a mainline culture. And we're really excited. We just got our first edition done, so at least the majority of the work is done. It'll be revised forever. But we'd appreciate your prayer in 3 areas. One, just that God would connect this vision to those whom He's called. That God would raise up evangelical coaches who've been in the main line so they understand this culture. And that God would just continue to give us wisdom to know how to prepare students so when they get there, they don't shoot themselves in the foot. That they're able to be a vehicle of God's incarnation. So thanks.
One thing I might add, because as some of you know, and many of you might guess, that for a long time in mainline churches, UCC, Presbyterian, Methodist, the evangelical voice was looked upon as something of a threat. And I want you to know that this ministry that we have been involved in is being received in the highest echelons of our own denomination. We've been encouraged by the President of the United Church of Christ, and we work with denominational officials. So this is really part of a movement that I really do believe has the hand of the Lord upon it. And it's nothing new. If you look at the history of the Christian church, there is this cyclical life in the Christian church where there is a devolution of the gospel and then a recovery of it. It devolves and you're recovered again. And we're just praying that if it's the time for the Lord to recover His word among His people in some of the churches that have moved more to allowing the world to set the agenda, we want the Scriptures to set the agenda. So please be prayerful that will happen and people's lives will be transformed.